Okay. I'm going to start with a quote from Greg Braden. It says, "In the instant of our first breath, we're infused with the power to translate the possibilities of our minds into the reality of our world. And just the way that we can tune a sound to change its pattern, we can tune our beliefs. We're limited only by the way we think of ourselves. Our acceptance of this and our knowing that we are never more than a belief away from our greatest love, our deepest healing, and our most profound miracles is such an awesome power." Indeed it is. Last week I mentioned that our lives, individually and collectively as this spiritual community, are right now in particular like an empty canvas or a blank page or a lump of clay or an opus, all waiting to be shaped into a work of magnificent art by us. And the world is waiting for us to be inspired so that we might become inspiring to it. And that inspiration is what gives fire to creating that magnificent work of art that we are as individuals and that we are as community. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote, "Every person in the course of his life must build, starting with the natural territory of his own self, a work, an opus. He makes his own soul throughout all of his earthly days, and in the same time he collaborates in another work, in another opus, the completing of the world." We are one. We are standing in unity. We're not just building ourselves as individuals, we are building ourselves as spiritual community, and far beyond that. We are creating a world that works for everyone. And before I leave this planet, I'd like to see that, so get busy. But you know, we have to become abundantly clear. So the work we've done with co-creation and the work we're doing with values and what we will do with vision is our way of becoming abundantly clear about who we are as individuals and collectively as community so that we can live a life of inspiration and purpose. If we don't do that, we're all over the place. And there's nothing wrong with being all over the place. I've been there. It's kind of a nice place. However, when we get focused and clear, we can become that inspiration and that purpose that unfolds in the world. You know, we're here on purpose and with power. We're here to rediscover our authentic beingness so that that can be expressed, to discover all of our unique gifts and talents. Each one of us have unique gifts and talents, and only we can be the full expression of those. So we're here to express those unique gifts and talents. If you don't express them, they go unexpressed, and that's not okay. I believe that every child, and we'll see in a little while, children are coming in here, I believe that every child is born knowing that they are the one to come and make a difference in this world. And then we do this thing called growing up. And we unlearn that truth about ourselves because we're busy being an adult. Too bad. Because what happens too often is that we lose our sense of who we have come here to be, and we stop being that, and we become doings instead of human beings, we become human doings. And doing without being is kind of empty. So I would invite you to retrieve your kid dreams. Retrieve those kid dreams and explore what it was that as a kid you wanted to be when you grew up. You know, for me, I was always wanting to be a priest. I was raised Catholic, so I wanted to be a priest. And of course my brothers were quick to point out that you can't even be an altar boy. Yeah, well, at least my friends didn't believe I couldn't be a priest because I had them all kneeling down for We have communion pretty much every day in my And the kid in me never lost sight of that dream. And the day that I became an ordained minister, my ordination took place in what was a Catholic cathedral. And my brothers were there, you better believe it. See? So retrieve your kid dreams because they give you important clues to what can inspire you now. And let the inspiration and creative spirit have its way with you now. It's not too late. You know, I did a whole series of lives before I really got back to who I was supposed to be. It's not too late. Let inspiration and the creative urge have its way with you now. Dr. Ernest Holmes, our founder, said, everything in the universe is a unique expression of the one. The one creative power is expressing in you in a unique way, seeking a fuller outlet of its infinite possibilities. God goes forth anew into creation through every person's life. God is living you right now. Open up and let it happen. You know, we're creative partners with Spirit. We are the creative experience and expression of Spirit in human form. From the ancient Greek, the word human means to be the dispenser of God's gifts. That is a high and holy calling, my friends. We are this dispenser of God's gifts. But we must fully embrace and embody that in order to be the dispenser of God's gifts. Our creativity, our uniqueness, is an inspired gift from God to us. And our creative expression is an inspired gift back to God and to the world from us. For me, my greatest inspirations have come through music. And music for me was proof as a kid that God really existed and that the presence was within me and all around me. That's how I first came to know God, was through music. Spirit's presence became real and personal to me when I played music. And, you know, as a kid, when I'd have a bad day, I mean, how bad can it be when you, I don't know, whatever, but, you know, I think I was having a bad day. I'd go lock myself in my room and I'd play my flute for an hour, and I'd come out, and I would be at peace, and all would be right with the world, because I allowed Spirit to move through me, and I knew that it was real. So music became my inspiration, my teacher, my life coach, my metaphor for living. And everything that I ever needed to know, I learned through music. And I want to share some of my life lessons with you that came to me through music. Your metaphor may be different, but I think you can relate to this. I'll start with the first lesson. You know, as a kid, I was a little weird. You know, most kids had pop stars as their idols. I was inspired by, my idol was Jean-Pierre Rampal, who was probably one of the greatest flautists ever to live. Well, I had just started playing flute, and my parents surprised me one Christmas with a trip back to New York City and tickets to the Rampal concert at Lincoln Center. First row center. Oh! Man, I could hardly contain myself. I mean, I'm sitting there, I could see the beads of sweat on his brow. I could feel his breath as he breathed into that golden flute. If I had died that day, it would have been full life. Seriously, I mean, I was like, wow. Well, comes intermission, and we were standing in the wings, my mom and I were standing in the wings, and you know how when you're tweens or teens, you really wish your parents would just sort of fade into the woodwork? I mean, you really don't want them to stand out, and certainly not stand out standing next to you. And my mother, much to my chagrin, was a very outgoing person. She'd speak to total strangers. You know, she'd carry on a conversation. I would just be mortified. You know, so here we are in the wings during the intermission. And back in those days, you could actually smoke inside of buildings, and unfortunately my mother smoked, although it turned out to be a good thing that day. So she's smoking a cigarette, and I'm standing there, you know, kind of waiting for, pretending I'm not really with her. And comes Robert Vernon-Lacroix, who was the harpsichord accompanist for Rampal, and he's walking down toward us, and I'm like, wow, cool. He's going to walk right past us. And lo and behold, he makes a beeline straight for us and walks right up to us. And I'm like, shaking in my boots, and he looks at my mother and says, oh, please, madam, I'm having a nicotine fit, please to give me a cigarette. And she looked at him, She looks at me, she looks at the pack of cigarettes, she looks back at him, and she says, I'll tell you what, you take my daughter back there to meet Ron Paul, you can have a whole pack. He looks at the cigarettes, he looks at her, he looks at me. He grabs the cigarettes, he grabs my hand, and whoosh, we go into Ron Paul's dressing room. So there I am, standing in front of Ron Paul, and I eloquently say, you know, like a cat that sees a I didn't even need my mother to mortify me then. But I met him. The spiritual lesson here. There is one. The spiritual lesson is ask believing and then open to receive. My mother believed she could get me to meet Ron Paul. And she opened up to receive that possibility. And it flooded out onto me. How lucky was I? Now, many, many, many years later, I was the director of sales and marketing at the Hotel Pontchartrain in Detroit. And Ron Paul was coming to Detroit to play with the Detroit Symphony. He was staying at our hotel. So I sent him a basket of fruit with a little note that says, I'm sure you remember me. Sort of described the incident and said, have a wonderful time. And I'm still playing flute. I'm sure he thought, what? If I knew how to spell so my second life lesson from music, or another one that I would like to share with you, about that same time, we went back, we were living in Texas at the time, we go back to Texas, and my parents decided if I wanted to, they would give me private music lessons, private flute lessons, and oh yeah, after that it was like, yeah, no stopping me. So we found a teacher, who was an old Russian guy named Nelsova, and he took me on as a student. I was his youngest and least experienced student, and he had students all the way from me to the first chair of the symphony, and everything in between. But he took me on, and I have to say that I was so inspired by him on so many levels, not just the music lessons, but the life lessons that I learned from him as well. And one of the things that he did, which was, it still blows my mind to this day, every year he would have a recital, and at that recital, some people, you know, the advanced students would play solos or duets or trios or quartets, but he also put together an ensemble. We played several orchestral pieces in an ensemble of 30 flutes. One of the pieces, and this was my first year, one of the pieces was Adagio for strings. Now understand this, Adagio for strings for 30 flutes. So he had to rearrange the music, first of all, to have all these flute parts fit so that they sounded like a string orchestra. And the greater task was that he had to arrange those pieces so at all levels of ability, starting with me, the youngest and least experienced, all the way to the first chair of the symphony. And it was amazing what he was able to do. So the first year, I'm going to be playing, right? So I go into my music lesson one evening, and I was kind of down, and I wasn't really playing well in my lesson. And so my teacher said to me, Suzi, what is wrong with you today? You seem very sad. I said, well, I've been practicing my part, you know, for the recital, and it really doesn't even matter if I show up or not, because all I do is I mostly rest, because I'm toot. And nothing could be so far from truth. We cannot play without you. Every part must be there. Every part must be exactly the part. We cannot play without you. You must play. I'm like, really? So because, no, you know can't win a player. So suddenly, I'm filled with confidence and purpose. And not, these are the best toots ever, anywhere. So the spiritual lesson. I learned that every single part, no matter how visible or not, no matter how big or not, every part is essential to the whole. Every part. One of my favorite authors, unknown, you know him, unknown, wrote, each of us is born with a specific genius that was bestowed upon us so that we can do our part to make the world a better place. All of us have a role that we're uniquely suited for. It's important for all of us to try to find our special gift and discover how we can best express it. Our unique gifts are like golden rays of expression that can encircle the world with light. Explore these riches that are yours to express. Every part is essential. And there was a bonus in all of that. The bonus inspiration, the bonus lesson that I learned was that with discipline and practice, our inspiration expands and our expression expands. And so the more I practiced, each year I got bigger and bigger parts. I got to toot a lot. I got to play trios and duets and solos as I advanced because I had the discipline to practice. Just like in spiritual practice, we have the discipline to practice our spiritual practice, our spirituality, so that we become more expansive, that we become deeper, we become more of who we truly are. And so for me, that discipline came through classical music training, which allowed me the freedom to be able to improvise and to create in the moment. But if I had not had that disciplined practice to begin with, I could never have done that. And so I have become awed by the greater expression of spirit creating through me in the now moment. It's just amazing to me. I didn't think anything could be could match the wonder and beauty of classical music, but I've discovered that creation in the moment does indeed match that. And I got to have that experience Friday night when I went up to Reading and played flute behind Rumi Caravan, which is a troupe of poets who recite poetry as conversation. So it's conversation, all in poetry, and I played behind them. None of it is rehearsed, it's all in the moment. And so I got to do this musical and spoken word duet with all, it was, oh man, I mean, it was like, I could feel spirit moving through each one of us and becoming one. It was so cool. And I'm checking to see how I can get them to come here. Okay. So it's going to be great. It's just an affirmation of letting spirit breathe me. And I realized that I am the instrument through which spirit breathes through the instrument that I play. And that's true for all of us. It's true for all of us. So that spiritual discipline and practice leads to greater inspiration and expression. And then finally, one of the last lessons I would like to share with you, and there are many, but this is probably my favorite. My dad and I were very close. My mom was the head of the family, my dad was the heart of the family. And my dad and I were very close. He was the one that always was driving me to and from the music lessons, to and from all the recitals and the competitions and all those things, and he was always right there in the front row, big old smile, cheering me on, just knowing I was great. You know, I could look at his face and know I was great. And it was long after he died, actually, that my brothers and I were going through some family photos, and we saw a photo of me with my flute. And my youngest older brother, he's kind of a, you know, He-Man, macho Alaska guy, not touchy-feely, spiritual kind of guy. But every now and then he says something profound. And this was one of those times, thank God. And I said, oh, look, I remember this recital. Dad was right there in the front row. And my brother said to me, he goes, you do know that Dad was tone deaf, don't you? What? I was crushed. I mean, I was like, oh my God, you know, tone deaf, that's like being colorblind in your ears. I mean, you don't know a C from an F sharp from a D flat. You don't know. I was like, oh my God, so he never really heard my music. And my brother said, no. He says, don't you get it? Dad was never there for the music. He was there for you. And I went, oh, how special was that? And so the spiritual lesson was the power of unconditional love and support. And I often think of my dad as a metaphor for spirit, for God. I remember the feeling of my little tiny hand in my dad's big, soft, puffy hand. And I think of that when I think of spirit. Spirit and I walking hand in hand in unconditional love and support. And I thank my dad for teaching me that lesson, knowing that inspiration is truly the in-breath of spirit. We go hand in hand in that breath. We are blessed and we are inspired, and then we become a blessing and an inspiration in this life. As we breathe in and breathe out. So again, to recap, the inspirational lessons, spiritual lessons that I learned from music and that you learn from whatever your life metaphor is. Ask, believing, and open to receive. Every part is essential to the whole. With discipline and practice, inspiration expands, and we have greater expression of that inspiration. And unconditional love and support is the inspiration, the in-breath of spirit itself. Spirit is the inspiration of all creative expression. Whether you realize it or not, every urge to create anything comes from that inspiration of spirit. And for me, again, that inspiration and that spiritual awakening came and still comes through music. And I just want to share with you, there's a quote, or several quotes actually, engraved in the walls of a German opera house. And they say, Bach gave us God's word, Mozart gave us God's laughter, Beethoven gave us God's fire, and God gave us music that we might pray without words. That's me. Goosebumps. So there is an inspiration and a passion to fully express ourselves in every single one of us. And I really invite you to consider what that is for you. What is it that inspires you? And even more importantly, what in you inspires others? Be that inspiration. St. Paul said that creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons and daughters of God. Actually, Paul didn't put the daughters in there yet. Women issues. So I put it in there for him. Because I have issues with Paul. We're doing couples counseling. So St. Paul said, creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons and daughters of God. And the one who begins a good work in you will complete it through you. You're not alone in this. You have the best partner on earth and in the cosmos, spirit itself. So tune into that inspiration, that in-breath of spirit, and listen. Listen closely and be willing to act on and express those creative inspirations and urges. It's not enough to just get the inspiration and keep it to yourself. Express it fully. Do not die with your song unsung, whatever you do. And I couldn't talk about music and not play, so I'm sneaking in an extra song. This one's dedicated to Dad, Mom, and Nelsova. The music still lives. So I want to close with this. Ernest Holmes wrote, as we bring ourselves to a greater vision, we induce a greater concept and thereby demonstrate more in our experience. And it is in this way there is a continuous growth and unfoldment taking place. True imagination is not fanciful daydreaming. It is fire from heaven. And get this, inspiration without application is hallucination. I love Ernest. He had a great sense of humor. And by the way, January is his birthday. I want to close by saying to you, blessings on your journey of inspiration and application. May you begin by awakening to the infinite possibilities that Spirit has planted in your soul and in the soul of this spiritual community, and then sing your song. Now, if you will take out your white sheet of paper and turn it over from the prayer, we're going to sing our song together, and this is the song to call a new minister here. When that new minister hears us singing this song, they're going to show up. So please stand with me, and let's read this new minister's sacred covenant for Chico Center for Spiritual Living. We'll begin with God has promised. Ready? God has promised, I am that which thou art. Thou art that which I am. Purpose. My new minister is the unity that I am. Vision. I see my new minister empowering compassion, connection, and growth. The universal intentions for my new minister are to be centered in spirit, grounded in principle, to awaken the wisdom within me through passionate and skillful teaching, to apply spiritual principles through collaborative leadership to meet the needs of the community. The community intentions for my new minister are to model and cultivate engagement in community service opportunities, to teach and facilitate mystical studies, guiding us into a deeper knowingness of the holy union within. And I invite you to take that home with you and add your own personal intentions that we might call this new minister that is a perfect